We're very privileged to have Shayla Abed, the Commission on Environmental Law Chair, with us, who will speak in a moment. And then the other speakers that we will hear from today are Nicholas Robinson from the Center for Environmental Legal Studies, Meredith Wright, recently retired Vermont environmental court judge from the United States, Jay Pendergrass from the Environmental Law Institute, Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin from, obviously from Brazil, and then Antonio Boza, environmental lawyer from the Philippines. And I'd like to start by inviting Shayla to come up and give some remarks.
Thank you. The Commission on Environmental Law supported this initiative from the very beginning because we really trusted it. And this is because our experience in many parts of the world has shown us that the judiciary needs to be trained and needs to be an expert on what they're dealing with. In many cases, and I received a lot of questions about why we were thinking about environmental adjudication and not, because this can be a way of just going one way and leaving all the rest of the judges out. And I told them it's very important because in our law schools we don't have this kind of training. And so at the end of the day, the judges have to deal with cases for which they have no expertise whatsoever. So this is very important. And in June this year, in Rio +20, we have the opportunity to work together, IUCN, the Environmental Adjudication Institute, and UNEP, in putting together this World Congress on Sustainability for judges. There were 200 chief justices, general prosecutors, and court accounts. This was amazing. And the only thing that came out from all the groups was we need training, we need more support, we need to have more expertise in this field. So I'm leaving now the chairmanship of CEL, but Antonio is going to take the lead, and I'm sure that he will continue supporting this initiative because it's important, there's a need. And as I said, the judiciary, through their decisions, is the one who shape the community behavior. They shape the society behavior, and so we need to put emphasis to have good judicial decisions, well-trained judges, committed, and all the things we know that we need as a bottom line, but to build a lot on training and on expertise. So thank you for making us part of this initiative. Nick, you have been the chair of the commission, and you know how important it is for us to be part of these great initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayla. Nick, is it okay for you to sit at the table, or would you prefer?
For Meredith?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll put her up here where people could use the podium.
Okay.
Meredith has to hear us all, so we can maybe organize ourselves in such a way that she can be heard and see at the same time. So this is good. No, this is fine.
We want to see her.
Well, you will see her when she goes on the big screen.
Yeah.
She wants to be hidden for now.
She doesn't
After all, she's wearing her pajamas. It's 1 a.m. No, seriously, it's wonderful to have this event at the 5th Conservation Congress of IUCN. I want to just give a little background. I won't speak too long because not everyone here has a sense of the historical development. This project to work to enhance the capacity of the courts around the world to enforce and apply environmental laws is a very long-term project. And this is one of the hallmarks of IUCN. We don't do things in the short term. It took us from 1981 to 1992 to develop the Convention on Biological Diversity, for instance. It's a major commitment that ran over the course of more than one chairman of CEL. And this is the same with the courts. Members of our commission, Justice Emilio Postigliani, for instance, of the court in Rome, the High Court, had been promoting an international court for the environment. And we've had a number of specialized international tribunals for the environment in the Hamburg Law of the Sea Tribunal, in the Human Rights Tribunals. But the idea that we could suddenly jump into having an international court has basically been put on hold by both the nation states and, frankly, a lot of others. So although we've had initiatives to promote this idea, it's actually been the grassroots development of courts which has grown around the world and grown very rapidly. Back in the late 1990s, the UN Environment Program met in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, with Lalanath de Silva, who many of you know, and organized the first conference of judges of South Asia under the auspices of the South Asian Cooperative Environmental Program, SACA. And it was quite a remarkably good event because the courts in South Asia, although the countries may not all agree in their foreign ministries and otherwise, the courts share a common jurisprudence. The Justice Bhagwati, Chief Justice Bhagwati of the Supreme Court of India, had taken a very leading role in articulating environmental norms and interpreting the Constitution of India, and this was picked up by the courts in Pakistan and Bangladesh, in Nepal, and this region became one of the leading regions for national high courts interpreting environmental laws in a very proactive way. From there, the UNEP conference, IUCN was a part of that first conference. We helped substantially. And from there, Chief Justice Hilario Davide Jr. received UNEP and IUCN in Manila under the auspices of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. Antonio Posa, who graces us with his presence here today, and you'll hear from him, was one of the key people in that meeting. The Philippines, of course, has been another one of the leading courts in the world, Supreme Courts, in articulating environmental norms. So after that, the judges were very enthusiastic about this, and the development of these regional symposia on environmental law that IUCN and UNEP sponsored spread rapidly. UNEP, as you know, does not have a mandate to actually work in the developed world. IUCN doesn't suffer that problem. So we organized, with UNEP's co-sponsorship, the conferences in London, the conferences in Central Europe, in Lviv, the conference for North America in New York, and then a subsequent conference which was also North American in the context of US, Mexico, and Canada through the Commission on Cooperation that exists between those three countries. There was a subsequent conference in South America, in South Pacific, in Australia, and this culminated in a meeting in 2002, the World Symposium of the Justices of Supreme and High Courts at the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. And the judges there crafted a strong set of recommendations for UNEP to advance capacity building of the courts to understand ecology, to understand environmental science, to understand how to interpret the multilateral environmental agreements through national legislation and so on. There were a series of parallel activities going on that confirmed in effect, independently, confirmed in effect that this was a very important function. For 20 years, the Environmental Law Institute in Washington, D.C. was holding a series of training programs, we can't call it training, but they did in fact sometimes, for judges in the Americas and elsewhere, India, Africa, and these were at the request of national courts. They wanted someone to explain what was happening in the courts. How did you handle environmental evidence? What procedures should be used? And so a large body of practice and experience was building up through these ad hoc, if you will, but independently organized symposia, training programs of the ELI. And meanwhile, two other great initiatives were happening. We had so much environmental legislation around the world that the need to enforce this legislation was becoming acute, and the International Network on Environmental Compliance and Enforcement, INESE, was organized and began to work with prosecutors with the support of the Dutch government and other governments, began to work with citizen suits and citizen enforcement. But of course, the prosecution of environmental claims requires a court. You've got to have a place to take your claims and to make them effective. At the same time, the European Economic Commission for Europe was developing the Aarhus Convention on access to environmental information, public participation in environmental decision-making, and access to justice. And the access to justice component, again, assumed the presence of a judiciary to whom you could petition and make your claims. And so the need was growing to focus on the courts. Now, after the World Summit on Sustainable Development, nothing happened from the intergovernmental standpoint. UNEP essentially discontinued its work because it moved on to other activity. IUCN continued this work, holding more symposia and cooperating, and ELI is a member of IUCN, and a great deal of leadership was taken up in South America by the judges of Mercosur that were being organized, and the Justice Antonio Benjamin began to pull together a number of courts, so much so that the judicial institutes that exist throughout Brazil, for instance, wanted to do training on environmental law and began doing so. So we reached the point of this Congress. We had a big meeting under the auspices of UNEP at Rio Plus 20, in which, if you go online, and Justice Benjamin will be speaking perhaps to this also, you will see the recommendations for continuing capacity building in environmental adjudication. 2 years ago, we held a large conference in New York to consider a report that Professor George Pring and his wife, Kitty Pring, Brock and Kitty Pring, had done, in which they traveled around the world and documented the presence by interviews of over 350 environmental courts and tribunals at the national or local level. To this, we now have gone on and done further studies that identify, as a result of reforms in the People's Republic of China, that 15 provinces of China now have over 40 chambers, environmental chambers in their courts to handle enforcement of environmental law. But most of the judges in all of these tribunals have never studied environmental law, not just in China, but in other places too. And so we need to create a process of exchanging of best management practices and so on. I remember at one of our symposia, the Canadian judges had come up with an idea to deal with recidivist corporations. You know what happens when a corporation pollutes or does something wrong, and then they do it again, and then they do it again, and they're fined, and it's a cost of business to do that. Well, this they didn't like in Canada. So they basically said to the corporation that showed up too many times in court, you know, and it was never my problem, that was some other official's problem in the company. So they said to the corporations, not only are you found in violation of the law, but you are now put on probation. And the judges did this as a judicial remedy. They just said there's nothing against holding a company like an individual subject to probation. So they put him on probation, and this happened again and again, and different provincial courts copied the practice in other courts, so that they finally amended the Justice Code in Canada to legitimize the process. And of course, the advantage of putting a corporation on probation is that they are under a continuing order to get their act together, to clean up their behavior and not show up again. And if they show up again, then they're fined heavily, and there's contempt of court, and the individuals are held accountable. So when I presented that experience to judges at a Mercosur conference that Justice Benjamin had roped me into, it was quite remarkable, because these judges, it was like you planted an idea from one end of the continent to the hemisphere to the other end of the hemisphere. But the judges immediately got it. We don't need to do very much. We just need to create the forum for exchanging best practices and innovations in the realm of environmental adjudication. So this conference today is really meant to set the stage for moving ahead to secure intergovernmental support to create an international judicial institute for environmental courts, or for courts handling environmental cases. It would be something which would be run by judges for judges. We really want to be the midwives for this exercise. But it's a tremendously exciting concept. And when you've all read, of course, some of the cases which led the Supreme Court of the Philippines to develop its new writ of nature. We've got innovations in courts all around the world now. In fact, it's intimidating for an academic because it's very hard to keep up with the practices in different parts of the world. The volume of adjudications has grown so much. So let me pass this baton over to Lynn Harmon, and Judge Wright will suddenly appear on the big screen in front of us, and we'll carry on here.
Okay, great. Do you want to say something else while I set up?
We also have online at the PACE Environmental website the electronic database for the conference that was held a year ago. All the papers have been published in a written published form, but they're available free online in the PACE Environmental Law Review. And referenced in that is an issue of the Journal of Court Innovation, which is also online. But we have CDs of the Journal of Court Innovation for those of you who want to take one with you. We basically have published 2 symposia of best practices on judicial decision making by the courts, academic symposia. So they provide us with some data and experience that you can have ready access to. There's a bunch of them on the table there, and I will defer now to Judge Wright. Welcome, Judge Wright.
All right. Are you, it's not entirely clear to me whether it's all set up, so will somebody tell me?
It's all set up and everything is perfect.
Okay. All right, well, I'm very glad to be there even in this virtual way. And I don't really have a few remarks that I want to provide you with to prompt the discussion that will happen later today. And just to set the stage for, although I saw when I was turned around to the audience that there were a number of people there whom I know and who know me. Let me just say, for anyone who doesn't, that I have had 20 years of experience as a judge with the Vermont Environmental Court, a very small court in a small state in the northeast of the United States, but which began in 1990 to handle the environmental cases. And these kinds of courts and initiatives sprang up, as Nick just said, on a kind of grassroots level, and they exist all over the world, and are coming up with some very innovative methods for promoting environmental adjudication. So here are 3 observations and then 3 suggestions about what judges need. The first observation is, no matter what the international agreements are, or the national or regional policies are created by countries, they must be largely carried out in a country's own domestic courts. It really matters then how well those courts can function in the environmental arena. The second observation is that as important as enforcement is, we cannot only focus on governmental enforcement against environmental wrongdoers. Enforcement action is certainly necessary, but it only happens after there has been a problem. And what we also have to focus on is the prevention of harm and discouragement of violation before it has occurred. And this requires, in turn, both citizen and NGO standing to bring appropriate cases, and the ability to assess economically based penalties linked to the economic benefit that the violator achieves from a violation. The third observation is that access to justice, that is, allowing people to come before the courts, means it must mean not only the ability to redress individual and community and environmental harm, but it also must include the ability to challenge administrative action to ensure that adequate permit conditions are imposed in advance on actions in the environment. To accomplish this, what do we need our courts and our judges to be able to do? And I should point out, as I think each of the speakers will point out, that these functions can be provided in specialized environmental courts or in the environmental divisions or green benches of the regular courts, or in